In 2012, a small aircraft flew low over the forest of Phnom Kulen, in northern Cambodia. Beneath the plane, there was nothing visible but an unbroken canopy of green, the same forest that had covered this plateau for more than 1,000 years. Under the wings, a laser scanner pulsed downward at hundreds of thousands of points per second. Most of those points hit leaves and branches, but some slipped through tiny gaps in the canopy and reached the ground. When the data came back to the lab, the team did something that should not be possible. They removed the forest from the picture. What appeared underneath stopped them. It was not a few stone temples. It was a city. Roads cut in straight lines. Square reservoirs. Terraces, channels, dams, the bones of a whole urban plan, sleeping under the roots. This was Mahendraparvata, the lost first capital of the Khmer Empire. The place where, in the year 802, a young king climbed a mountain and declared himself a god-king. For more than 1,000 years, the jungle hid it. This is the story of how it was built, how it was forgotten, and how a beam of light finally pulled it back out of the trees. Cambodia in the 8th century was not yet an empire. It was a patchwork of small kingdoms in the lower Mekong basin, mostly known to outside historians by Chinese names like Chenla. They were Hindu and Buddhist, rich in rice and rivers, but politically fragmented. To the north of the Great Lake of Tonle Sap, the land rises into a long sandstone plateau called Phnom Kulen. Today it is forest and waterfalls. In the 8th century it was already considered sacred, a mountain where the gods of India were believed to live in this corner of the world. For Hindu kings in mainland Southeast Asia, mountains were not just geography. They were Mount Meru, the cosmic axis at the center of the universe. To rule from a mountain was to claim a place in the divine order. Around the year 802, a young king named Jayavarman II made his way up onto this plateau. He had spent time at the courts of Java to the south, and now he was building something new, a kingdom of his own, on his own ground. According to a stone inscription carved more than 200 years later at a temple called Sadok Kok Tom, he gathered his priests on the mountain and held a great ceremony. A Brahminate performed a ritual that declared the king a Chha Kravatin, a universal sovereign, and freed his land from any foreign overlord. That ritual is called the Devyaraja, the God King. It bound the ruler to the god Shiva, and the god to the land. From that moment, the kings of Cambodia would not just rule, they would embody divinity. The Khmer themselves remembered this ceremony as the beginning of their empire. Whatever its exact details, 802 became a founding date. And the capital where it happened was called Mahendraparvata, the Mountain of Indra, king of the gods. For a long time, scholars knew the name Mahendraparvata only from inscriptions. They knew there were old temples scattered across Phnom Kulen, half-eaten by forest. But they had no map of the city itself, and no real sense of its size. The plateau was difficult to reach. The forest was dense, the slopes were steep, and in the 20th century the whole region became dangerous. Civil war, then the Khmer Rouge, then decades of unexploded ordnance kept archaeologists out. The few who did get in found surprising things. Sandstone temples in clearings. Stone reliefs of Vishnu lying on the cosmic serpent. And in a small riverbed called Kayabalspian, hundreds of small carvings of lingas, the symbol of Shiva, sculpted directly into the bedrock so that the river water would flow over them and be blessed. This told them that Phnom Kulen had once been a major religious center. But a religious center was not the same as a capital. To call Mahendraparvata a city, you needed evidence of urban planning, roads, water management, neighborhoods, scale. That evidence was buried under roots and centuries of leaf litter. From the ground, you could not see it. From the air, the canopy hid it. You needed a way to look through the trees, not around them. The breakthrough did not come from a new excavation. It came from a technology that had been used to map American forests and Mayan ruins, but never tried on this scale in Cambodia: airborne laser scanning, known as LiDAR. LiDAR works by firing pulses of laser light downward from a low-flying aircraft, hundreds of thousands per second. Each pulse that hits something, a leaf, a branch, the ground, bounces back and is timed precisely. A dense forest looks solid from above. But it is not. Tiny gaps between leaves let some of those laser pulses slip all the way to the floor. After hours of flying, you have billions of returns, and from them you can build a model of every layer in the forest, including the ground itself. In 2012, an archaeologist named Damien Evans helped lead the first major LiDAR survey over the temples of Angkor and the slopes of Phnom Kulen. A second, Larger campaign followed in 2015. The two together covered nearly 2,000 square kilometers of forest and farmland in northern Cambodia. When the data was processed, the canopy was stripped away in software. What was left was the bare earth, as if the forest had simply been peeled off. Hills, river valleys, fields, and lines. Many, many straight lines. On Phnom Kulen, the lines formed a grid. Long avenues ran in cardinal directions. Square depressions marked reservoirs. Earthen banks outlined enclosures and what looked like residential blocks. This was a planned city. The grid stretched across more than 50 square kilometers of the plateau. It was not a small ritual site around a few temples. It was a fully laid out urban capital, in a region where everyone had assumed the first true Khmer city was Angkor, down on the plain. LiDAR did not magically discover Mahendraparvata. Archaeologists like Jean-Baptiste had already spent years on Phnom Kulen, mapping individual temples and confirming that something larger lay around them. What the laser did was reveal the whole pattern at once. For the first time, you could see the shape of a Khmer capital from the moment it was born. Streets that converged on a central temple. Channels carrying water down from the plateau. Embankments that turned mountain runoff into rice fields. What kind of city was Mahendraparvata? On the ground, after the LiDAR map pointed the way, archaeologists began to walk those grid lines and dig. The picture that emerged was strange and ambitious. The Khmer of the 9th century did not build cities like the Romans or the Chinese. They did not enclose them in walls of stone or brick. The boundary of a Khmer capital was water. Rectangular reservoirs called BRI held the wet season rain, and a network of channels and dams pushed it through the city. On Phnom Kulen, LiDAR revealed several of these reservoirs and a major embankment, sometimes called the Great Dam, which seems to have been designed to capture and redirect entire seasonal flows. It was ambitious, possibly even over-ambitious, and there are signs it failed and was abandoned. Around this water system, archaeologists found the foundations of small brick temples, residential mounds, and the outlines of what may have been markets and workshops. Most of the houses were probably wooden, raised on posts, with thatched roofs, and they have left almost nothing behind. The stone, in contrast, has survived. Small sandstone shrines stand half-collapsed in the forest, their lintels carved with images of Indra on his three-headed elephant, of Vishnu, of dancing Apisaras. At Kaabal-Spian, the riverbed of carved lingas tells a quieter story. Generations of priests and pilgrims came to this stream to sanctify the water that flowed down from Phnom Kulen, across the lowlands, and finally into the rice fields of the Khmer heartland. This was the central idea of Mahendraparvata, a god-king on a sacred mountain, divine water released through stone-cut shrines, feeding the rice that fed the kingdom. The city was not just a residence. It was a machine for turning a mountain into a country. Jayavarman II did not stay on the mountain forever. Inscriptions tell us he moved his court several times during his long reign, and eventually back down to the lowlands. By the time he died, the center of his kingdom was on the plain near the Great Lake. His successors continued that move. They founded a new capital called Haraharalewaya, in the Roluois area east of modern Siem Reap. And at the end of the 9th century, King Jayavarman I founded Yashodharapura, the city that we know as Angkor. The reason for the migration was practical. The mountain was sacred, but it could not feed an empire. The plain around Tonle Sap had monsoon rains, alluvial soil, and a lake that swelled every year and dropped fish into the rice fields when it shrank. Cities need calories. The plateau could host a court and a ritual capital. The plain could host a population. So the political center moved downhill, while Phnom Kulen remained a sanctuary, a place of pilgrimage rather than power. For about 2 more centuries, Mahendraparvata seems to have kept being used. Temples were maintained, water flowed through some of the channels, and pilgrims continued to bathe in the river of Lingas. But the city as an urban project was already winding down. By the time the great Khmer kings of the 12th and 13th centuries, Jayavarman II, who built Angkor Wat, and Jayavarman VII, who built Angkor Thom, were transforming the plain into one of the largest cities in the medieval world, Phnom Kulen was a memory. A holy memory, but a memory. After Angkor itself collapsed as a capital in the 15th century, the whole region quieted. Khmer power moved south. Theravada Buddhism replaced Hindu state cults. The dense bureaucratic engine of Angkor faded, and the forest moved back in. European travelers and scholars rediscovered Angkor in the 19th century, with all the noise and confusion that rediscovery involves. But Phnom Kulen, smaller and higher and harder to reach, stayed mostly in the background. A few French scholars noted temples on the plateau. None of them mapped the city around the temples. Then the 20th century brought a much darker silence. Cambodia was drawn into the wider war in Indochina, then into its own civil war, then into the Khmer Rouge regime of the late 1970s, in which roughly 1 in 4 Cambodians died. After that, Phnom Kulen became a hideout for remnants of the Khmer Rouge into the 1990s. Landmines were laid through the forest. Even when peace came, the plateau was simply too dangerous to survey for a long time. So when, in the early 21st century, a team finally returned with LiDAR equipment and the political space to use it, they were looking at a landscape that had been protected by exactly the wrong things. Tragedy. Mines. The sheer stubbornness of a tropical forest. The first LiDAR maps of Phnom Kulen, published from 2013 onward, did something rare in archaeology. They changed the textbook in a single moment. Everyone who studied early Cambodia had to revise their picture of the 9th century. The lost capital was not a legend with a few stones. It was a planned city, on a scale that suggested the Khmer rulers were already thinking like state builders before they ever moved down to Angkor. Mahendraparvata was a rehearsal for empire. The 2015 and 2019 follow-up surveys filled in more detail. They confirmed the grid. They mapped more reservoirs and embankments. They showed how the urban plan related to the temples and to the water system. And they hinted that the city had been bigger and shorter-lived than anyone expected. LiDAR cannot date a single stone. But by combining its maps with ground excavations, ceramic finds, and inscriptions, the archaeologists could place this layout firmly in the 9th century. It really was the world Jayavarman II had walked through. And it raised a new question. If Mahendraparvata was that ambitious that early, why did it not last? Why did the move to the plain come so quickly? The current best guess is that the water engineering simply did not work as well on the plateau as it would on the plain. A mountain captures less rain than its slopes drain. The Great Dam may have failed. The reservoirs may have silted up. The harvests may not have been enough to feed an expanding population. The gods stayed on the mountain. The people came down. Today, you can walk on parts of Mahendraparvata, if you know where to look. There are footpaths through the forest of Phnom Kulen, past temple ruins half swallowed by roots, down to the river where the lingars are still carved into the stone. Most visitors who come up here come for the waterfalls and the reclining Buddha at pre-angkor. They do not realize they are walking through the bones of a vanished city. Their picnic spots sit on top of a 1,000-year-old urban grid that they cannot see. That is one of the strange gifts of LiDAR. It does not bring back what is lost. The temples remain ruined. The wooden houses are gone forever. The names of almost everyone who lived in Mahendraparvata will never be known. But the laser shows us the outline of their lives. Where their streets ran. Where their priests bathed. Where their farmers planted rice fed by water blessed on a sacred mountain. From that outline, we can imagine the people back into the picture. The Khmer Empire we usually picture is the empire of Angkor Wat, of Bayon's smiling faces, of vast moats and stone causeways. That empire took 600 years to build. Mahendraparvata is its first sentence. A young king on a mountain. A priest reciting words taken partly from India, partly from older local memory. A declaration that a small kingdom in the forest was, from this day, ruled by its own god-king, answerable to no foreign court. Whatever actually happened that day in 802, the Khmer kept telling the story. They built temple after temple on the plain, but they kept coming back to Phnom Kulen to remember where it had begun. That memory then faded. The mountain stayed sacred, but its city went under the trees, and for 1,000 years it slept. And the world it had given birth to grew, peaked, fell, and was almost forgotten too. It took a beam of light, fired at the ground from a small plane, to wake any of it up again. Most lost cities are not lost. They are simply waiting under something, sand, water, jungle, forgetting, until we invent the tool that can see them. Mahendraparvata was waiting under the forest. Somewhere else, another city is waiting under the sand, or the sea, or our own assumptions about what could not possibly have existed there. If you enjoyed this story, there are more lost civilizations waiting. In the next video, we'll travel to another corner of the ancient world, where a kingdom remembered by only a few inscriptions and a hill of ruins is being rebuilt from the ground up. Subscribe so you don't miss it.